Welcome to the Stages of Trauma Bootcamp. So, I've created this video just because I want to make sure that you guys have kind of a heads up about what it is that we're going to be talking about. So, the stages of trauma mirror the stages of grief. And we're going to be getting into that, but we're going to start here at the very beginning. The Trauma Recovery Bootcamp, identifying your trauma stage. So, this is all about the truth of trauma. What are the stages of trauma? What are the signs and symptoms of trauma? The neurobiology of trauma, changing the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response, having healthy coping mechanisms for difficult emotions. And what is body awareness? How does that help? Challenging negative distortions and self-beliefs, setting boundaries, and communicating effectively. I'm going to have some resources available at the end as well. But while we're going through all of this, please, if you can take a moment to grab a blank sheet of paper and pencil or an ink pen so that you can take notes if you feel like that might be helpful to you. Of course, this video is going to be available to you to go back and watch later on as well, if that's what you would like to do. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Amanda Blackwood. I'm an author, artist, public speaker, trauma recovery mentor, podcaster, mom, wife. There's a lot of different stuff that I do. This is just my Facebook page. I have a total of 13 books currently published and available at the time of this video, but there are more on the way here very quickly. Up in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a copy of my autobiography. It's called Custom Justice. That is my autobiography as a survivor of human trafficking. Now, I've done a lot of research, and a lot of these books are based on the research that I've done from trauma recovery through my own experiences. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can find all of my books through Barnes & Noble, through Amazon. You can also go to my website. That web address is down at the bottom, growthfromdarkness.com. You can go there and find out a lot more about my podcasts and even the mentorship. You can send me a private message or set up a meeting with me just so we can sit and talk and discuss what it is that I might be able to help you to do. So the truth about trauma. About 1/2 of all U.S. adults will experience at least one traumatic event in their lives, but most do not develop PTSD. So trauma begins when an event or experience overwhelms normal coping mechanisms. So the events are not traumatic because they're rare. They are traumatic because they overwhelm our normal coping responses. So an individual's normal coping responses provide a sense of control, connection, meaning, and safety. If those things are not taken away from you, then you have a lived experience. If those things are taken away from you, then this creates a traumatic interaction or environment and a traumatic lived experience. The stages of trauma mirror the stages of grief. But why? First, let's discuss what the stages of trauma are. Those stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And when you're going through these stages, you don't go through them in a linear order. So you might go through denial and then skip down to bargaining and then go to acceptance for a little while before bouncing back up into anger. And then you can get into this depressive mode before you go right back into denial. But why? Well, the stages of trauma mirror the stages of grief because when you experience something traumatic, your brain creates new neural pathways that will cause you to react or think differently than what you did before the event. If you think about it in terms of this example, if you're a child and you experience a traumatic event such as the loss of a parent, this can be very traumatic for a child, and it can change your entire life. If you've lost your dad at a very young age, you may start to develop this overwhelming sense of fear that you're going to lose the people in your life that you care most about. So the reason that the stages of trauma mirror the stages of grief is because that person that could have been, the person that you were going to be, if nothing in your life had been traumatic, that person is gone. And you have to take a moment to grieve for what you've lost, not just your parent, but for that sense of self and that sense of safety. Some of the signs and symptoms of trauma. How do you know if you have trauma? You can experience things that you might not even completely understand. That's no fun. But initial reactions to trauma can include a whole lot of things, including exhaustion, confusion, sadness, anxiety, agitation, numbness, disassociation, and confusion. Excuse me. Now, the neurobiology of trauma, this is the study of the biology of the nervous system. So this is the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So fight mode here in the first little bubble, that is facing any perceived threat, real or illusionary, aggressively. So even if there isn't an actual threat in front of you, you can face this and be very aggressive about it. That's not always a healthy response. The flight mode is running away from any perceived danger, real or illusionary. If you feel like something is dangerous, you may run away from it. This can be physically actually taking off and running away, or it can be withdrawing your emotions and pulling back in a way that you didn't expect yourself to. Freeze is being unable to move or act against a perceived threat. This is something I learned a lot about when I was a flight attendant, believe it or not. This is a very common response for so many people who go through some kind of a traumatic event. They get trapped. So often when a plane crashes or a boat is sinking, a person doesn't know how to get out of their seat. They can't unbuckle their seatbelt. This is an absolute freeze response. It is involuntary. And you never know how you're going to react until you're in that situation. So for those of you out there who have a tendency to tell somebody, well, I would have in your situation run away or fought or done this or done that. You never know how you're going to react to a situation until you're in that situation. The freeze response is probably one of the most common. The fawn response is immediately acting to try to please someone who may be a perceived danger to avoid conflict. This is something that can be taught, and it can be untaught too. Like I said, I'm a survivor of human trafficking. I was taught, and a lot of people refer to it as groomed. It was groomed into knowing that if I kept the people around me happy, the abuse would not continue. The fight, flight, and freeze or fawn responses. So how do you change these automatic responses that you have? Well, you want to become aware of the neurobiological response that you have. Which thing are you more likely to do? Let go of any shame. What you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're doing, there's no shame in your response. This is an automatic response. Find a good therapist that you can talk to, a good therapist. If you don't like your therapist, get a new one. If you don't trust the person that you're paying to help you, then why are you still paying them? I've talked to so many people, and that something like 90% of all people who have therapists lie to their therapist. Don't do that. Find somebody that you can trust and you can actually talk to. And if you feel like your therapist isn't that person, you need a new one. Notice what your basic needs are and listen to them. And I know that sounds so difficult, and it really is very difficult. But if you understand what your basic needs are, you can better understand how to pursue them. And accept that abuse is never deserved and anger has a purpose. It is not healthy to stay in that place of anger for a prolonged period of time, but in the moment it has a purpose. It's telling you something. You have to learn to listen to that. And the abuse is not deserved. It is not your fault. And what happened to you? Yes, it happened. You didn't ask for it, no matter who says otherwise. And allow for complex reactions and emotions toward the abuser. A lot of people are very confused as to why they might still possibly have feelings of love towards somebody who hurt them. Sadly, it's very common. This is something called trauma bonding. And this is something that I will go into in a lot of personal sessions, but we don't quite have that kind of time today. But healthy coping. So these are a lot of things that I have started trying to incorporate into my life in abundance, including exercise. So with exercise, you can just go for a walk around the block. You can follow some yoga videos on YouTube. One of the things that I was able to do is my husband and I found a really nice elliptical machine on Facebook Marketplace. We brought it home. He set it up for me. I take my phone and set it up on the head of the elliptical machine, and I will get on there and watch an entire movie. I just got done doing that right before I jumped in here today. I'll watch an entire movie while on the elliptical machine. And the more exciting the movie is, the faster I go, I learned. So it's been a lot of fun. Eat healthy foods. I am cooking a whole chicken for dinner tonight. It's going to be delicious. I do have a cookbook with lots of healthy recipes in it, but eat healthy foods. Pick up stuff that you know is going to feed your body. Lots of vegetables. Maybe if you eat red meat, fabulous. I love it. You can maybe have smaller portions of red meat and more vegetables. That way you're not giving up the things that you love, but you're making sure that you're feeding yourself things that are going to benefit you physically. Make a gratitude list. This one, it sounds really cheesy, but on the really bad days, pick up that list. Look at it. Read it. It will help you in ways that you cannot predict. Instead of having a gratitude list, one of the things that I'll do is jot down the things that I'm grateful for on little scraps of paper and then drop them into an empty flower vase. On a really bad day, I might dump them all out on a coffee table. On a day, I might pull one or two out and read them. But it's really easy to mix them up that way. You're not reading the same ones every time. It's like drawing a name from a hat. It's kind of fun. And laugh. I love watching comedies, but they say laughter is the best medicine, of course. It doesn't cure everything, but it definitely helps. Build a routine for yourself. Have a calendar, have a schedule. Having a routine can help to reduce the buildup of stress caused by trauma. And try to take yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit when you do that. And get creative. One of the strongest trauma responses that we have is a need for control. And having that need for control will make you believe that you can't manage anything and you have to have control of everything. Use what you do have control of to really emphasize what it is that you're reaching for. As an example, yes, I do write. I love to write, and it's been hugely beneficial for me to be able to have that as a creative outlet. I love it. I wouldn't be the same without being able to write. But a lot of people don't like to write. A lot of people don't even like to read or don't want anybody to find what they're writing, and they're afraid that somebody might find their words. That's fine. Find a different creative outlet. I started painting at the end of my therapy. It was hugely helpful for me. I didn't realize that I knew how to paint at all, and now I've sold my paintings internationally. You can also cook. Having control over the ingredients that you put into your food. Yes, eat healthy foods, but also take the moment, take that time to be creative with creating them. It's a beautiful thing. If you feel like you don't have any kind of artistic talent at all, there's always something. You can find it. And if you need help, reach out to me. I used to work with first and third grades and an eighth grade special needs class. I volunteered as an art teacher because I loved doing this so much for people. I'd love to help you too. Now, body awareness. You want to be aware of your movements, your joints, your physical sensations, your muscles, your posture. All of this stuff bundled up is what makes you physically you. So, body awareness is the ability to recognize one's physical sensations, movements, and posture. This is not an automatic skill, but it does allow people to become better attuned to their body and recognize how it responds to their environment. So, take a moment. Are there any of your joints aching? Which ones? For me, I have a couple of toes that are kind of achy right now in the muscles. What muscles are tense at the moment and why? Well, my lower back is a little bit achy, and that's because I just spent 2 hours on an elliptical machine. How's your posture? Are you sitting straight? Are you crooked? Right now, I'm sitting incredibly straight. My ankles are crossed. It's important to be aware of these little things. Are you moving any part of your body currently? Well, I talk with my hands, so there's a lot of movement there, but most of the rest of me is pretty still. What physical sensations do you feel? Is your chair comfortable? Can you feel a watch band on your wrist? Are you aware of how your feet are resting on the floor? Are they on the floor? Negative distortions. So, what is overgeneralizing? If you apply the experience of one event across all or many other events, you could be overgeneralizing. For example, if one of your relationships ended poorly, you may assume that they will all end poorly. I had a terrible breakup in 2009. Every guy that I'm ever going to know from now on is going to treat me the same as he does, as he did. Let me tell you, that couldn't be further from the truth. What is labeling? Well, focusing on one aspect of something, but ignoring the rest is labeling. If you've been trying to learn a new skill, but you can't seem to get the hang of it, you might tell yourself, oh, I'm terrible at this, despite having made improvements. This is where we go back to that gratitude. If you're getting slowly better at something, there's improvements, no matter how small those increments are. Don't label yourself saying, I can't do this. I have no artistic talent. I'm terrible at this. Because with practice, you can get better. And what is mind reading? I'm guilty of this one. Mind reading is assuming that you already know what somebody else is thinking without having any evidence of what they actually are thinking. You are assuming that you know them well enough to predict them. This can fall under the trauma response of hypervigilance, but be aware because it doesn't have to be that. You might be completely wrong and you never know. What is catastrophizing? Boy, that's a word. When every single negative situation feels like a total disaster that it could easily turn into one, you could be practicing catastrophic thinking. For example, if your partner is late for dinner, you might assume that they're in a hospital. A couple of times my husband has been late home from work and I have automatically assumed, oh my gosh, something's happened. He's in trouble. He's been hurt. That's not good. What is an all or nothing mentality? Well, thinking in extremes without considering the full range of possibility is known as an all or nothing mentality. In this thinking, you may have trouble finding the middle ground in any situation. This is not healthy for relationships. But challenge your negative distortions. Consider that the effects from one situation don't necessarily apply to others, even if circumstances do seem related. Ask yourself if the situations are truly the exact same thing to gain more insight into the nature of their differences. Focus on more than one aspect of a situation to see the bigger picture. Take a step back. Get a broader view of the situation and try to identify more than one attribute of it. And recognize that you may be jumping to conclusions about the thoughts or intentions of another person. Gather evidence in support of your assumptions, and then challenge it by looking for evidence that denies your assumptions. That one's hard. Think of the best case scenario. Many outcomes are possible in any given situation. Have you considered other more positive outcomes? When my husband is late for dinner, maybe he's stopping off to grab a new album or new book that he wanted. All or nothing mentalities. You want to identify the two categories you're grouping something into. For example, flattering or insulting. Then you may try to find a middle ground that blends the two extremes together. That's going to be a challenge for a lot of people. And whatever you do, don't should all over yourself. Making should statements means that you have to concentrate on what you think you should be instead of what you are experiencing. Try asking yourself these following questions. Feel free to pause here if you'd like to do this as an exercise. Boundaries in healing. You want to honor your emotional limits. Emotional boundaries are particularly crucial for survivors dealing with trauma. Expressing emotions and recounting traumatic experiences can be overwhelming, and survivors they have to be allowed to share at their own pace. Establishing emotional boundaries communicates that their feelings are valid and they have the right to protect their emotional well-being. Reclaim your personal space. Survivors of trauma may have experienced physical or emotional violations, causing them to feel as though their personal space was absolutely invaded. Setting and enforcing boundaries helps survivors to reclaim their personal space, whether it's physical or emotional or even psychological. This act of self-assertion sends a clear message that their space and their autonomy are respected. And empowering choices. Trauma can lead to feeling of absolute powerlessness, as survivors often had their choices stripped away from them during whatever traumatic event it is. By setting boundaries, a survivor can regain the power to make decisions that align with the comfort of their own well-being. This newfound agency reinforces their sense of self-worth and control over their lives. This is super important. But reduce triggers and re-traumatization as well. Boundaries act as a protective shield against triggers that may reignite traumatic memories. By clearly defining what is acceptable and unacceptable, survivors minimize the risk of encouraging situations that could lead to re-traumatization. This enables them to engage in daily activities and interactions without the constant fear of being triggered. Create some healthy relationships in your life. Setting boundaries is a vital tool for cultivating healthy relationships, both with oneself and others. Survivors learn to distinguish between individuals who respect their boundaries and those who disregard them. This discernment helps survivors from supportive relationships that contribute positively to their healing journey and restore your self-worth. Trauma can erode a survivor's self-esteem and self-worth, especially survivors of physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, human trafficking. By setting boundaries, survivors can communicate to themselves and others that they deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. This act of self-affirmation gradually rebuilds their self-esteem, reminding them of their inherent worthiness. And there's always seeking professional support. Setting boundaries can be challenging, especially for trauma survivors who may have a history of boundary violations. Working with a therapist or a counselor who specializes in trauma can provide survivors with guidance on establishing healthy boundaries and assessing any resistance or fear that might arise. Communicating effectively is very important. The guide to communication that I use, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? I put everything through these 3 filters. If it is not necessary, don't say it. If it is not true, don't say it. And if it is not kind, but it meets those other 2 filters, make it as kind as possible. Thank you so much for joining me, for watching this video. Please take a moment to visit my website to learn more information, sign up for future boot camps, request one-on-one recovery mentorship, all of that stuff. You can also connect with me on social media. All the links are on my website. I am available primarily on Facebook. I'm on Facebook a lot, but also Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Amazon, and a whole lot more. But my website is growthfromdarkness.com. Thank you so much. Please leave your feedback. I would love to know more about how you have perceived this, if any of this you think might be helpful. And I do have a trauma recovery book out there, and I'm working on writing the rest of the series. So that first trauma recovery book is called Growth from Darkness. And that is, once again, all about discovering your trauma stage. Goodness, I can't talk today. So take a moment, check out my website. Please take a moment, check out my books. Here is the Growth from Darkness book. This is all about the stages of trauma. The other 3 books will be out later on this year. The cookbook that I mentioned earlier is all the way over here, Surviving in the Kitchen, my autobiography. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to connecting with you.